Welcome along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David,
And I'm Matt.
and we love making it count and having conversations about this. And we did our last episode on the trifecta of trust, the book. We talked about the different elements of it. And at the end, Matt, you sort of said we should do another episode on this, on how to do that, because we put a lot
Yeah.
of information on why it's important and what trust is and what are the elements that build it up. But we didn't really get into the gritty of like, well, how do I build trust and how do I grow those things? So we thought we'd sort of go that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's always helpful to have some handholds, how to do something. We want to make it count. It's great to stick in the bit of the theory as to like, well, what is it and the reason for why. But unless we've got something that's maybe a little bit of a practical thing, then maybe nothing changes in our lives.
Exactly. So if this is your first episode listening to us, go and listen to last week's one, and then this one can be your second one.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
in the book, The Trifecta of Trust by Joseph Folkman, he tells us of the story of Wag Dodge. And they were firefighting. I can't remember where it was in the States, but it was in the States. And there were firefighters out fighting a big like bushfire, like it was a forest fire, 200-foot high flames. They were moving like 30 miles an hour. And this guy, he's a 9-year veteran of fighting fires. He knew that there was no way that they would be able to outrun this fight, this fire. So, and this was in 1949. So he sort of said to the group of like 15 firefighters who was with him, it's like, we have to stop and we have to light a little fire to clear the area around us and and stay there. And even his second in command was like, no way, and carried on. And all the other people just carried on. And he's like, well, there's no way. So he did that. He lit it. He burnt the area around him. He laid face down, covered a sort of cloth over his mouth, and just laid there. And like 13 of the other guys ended up dying. One was severely burned, but he was fine.
Wow.
He got away without it. And now it's become common practice for firefighters to learn that trick. And in the book, he says, well, they didn't trust him. They didn't trust that he was the expert. And there was a new team that had been formed. And when their lives were on the line, and their lives were on the line, they didn't trust him. And that cost people's lives. And so, for those of us that think, oh, trust, it's a nice to have, not great. Well, there are times in our lives where our lives literally depend on who we trust and whether we're trustworthy.
Mm.
And there's another guy that did some research on organizations, high trust organizations. And there were just four numbers I pulled out of that. High trust organizations have 40% less burnout.
Wow.
Interesting. They have 50% higher productivity. Interesting. 29% more life satisfaction. So like
Nice.
satisfaction even beyond work, 29% more life satisfaction. And the last one, which was interesting, in high trust organizations, people have 17% more compensation.
Huh.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, so that's just I mean, those weren't things that we came up in the last episode, but it's just resetting that thing of like, this is important. This is why, this is what. Um, I don't know how much you've done. The three elements were sort of expertise, consistency, and building relationships. So, Matt, what do you think it looks like to build trust through expertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the foundational aspect of it is get good at what you do. So you are at the end of the day, part of this, this isn't about going, oh, I need to behave in certain ways that will make people trust me more. It's not about like manipulating, and it's not about putting a shit. It's about changing some fundamental bits. So if you're good at what you do, that is already you've already got that expertise. But if there's areas in which you go, actually, I'm not very good at that, and that's an important part of what I do, either in my family or my job role or volunteering or whatever community it is. If there's something that is important that you have either signed up for or has been placed on your shoulders and you're not good at it, learn how to get good at it. And if you try that and you go, yeah, actually, there's just nothing I can do to actually, I'm just not the right person for this job, then give that to someone else and be honest and own that up and go, this is just totally outside of my skill set. I've tried and I'm never going to be as good as they are, So I think there's an aspect of just hone your craft.
Well, exactly that. If I said, Matt, I want to become an expert storyteller, how do I become an expert storyteller? Well, it's fairly obvious. You would say, well, go read some books about storytelling, go listen to some podcasts about it, learn about it, go to conferences, practice it, do it, get in front of people. So there's
Yeah.
that element of like, well, how do you become an expert in anything? You learn about it and you do it. You learn and you do, you learn and you do. But then there is the other element that he touches on in his book, which is about sort of the perception. And he was like, well, then there's an element of like, well, go speak at conferences. If I want to become a really good storyteller, why don't I go and speak at those conferences and become the facilitator of groups? And actually, that
Yeah.
was one of the lines he said, is that when you are an expert, facilitate groups. Don't be the expert among experts, be the facilitator of experts. And that's about being the perception of expertise then as well. You are an expert, but also you're confident enough that you don't need to tell everyone how much you know. You're enabled to effectively facilitate a group. So yeah, those are some ideas. It seems really obvious. How do you become an expert? Well, you learn and you practice.
I like that. And there's another aspect as well to that, almost taking the facilitator role, even if you are not actually asked to facilitate, you can take that perspective, and it's the whole thing of, yeah, am I here to try and show everybody all the stuff I know, or do I recognize that across the room there's like 10 different brains there, and they all have information that I don't have, and so I can learn something. And so if I have that learner's mindset, I can, I'm already positioning myself to actually grow in expertise, and I'm more likely to, maybe, as we spoke in the last episode, ask them those perceptive questions, which makes everyone go, oh, interesting. That's an interesting question I hadn't thought of. And it reveals so much more. The questions someone asks reveals so much more about like their real, rather than the stuff that we end up spouting, or the knowledge we end up sharing.
Yeah. So the final sort of thing that I would chuck in there, it's not really a thing so much as four things, but he talks about this idea of cross training. Like a good long distance runner, they're probably going to be pretty reasonable at good long distance cycling as well, or long distance other events. And that there's an element of, in sport, you train here because it has effective training over here. There's a cross training element of it. And he says that's true for expertise. And he said there are four areas that relate very strongly to expertise statistically. And so being a role model, anticipating problems, connecting the work to the vision, and keeping others informed. So, and I think those last two especially are interesting. The idea of like, how can I connect the work I'm doing or the work my team is doing to the organization's vision? And that helps you be perceived as an expert, and bringing expertise. And also that our last one of like keeping others informed that, hey, I'm on track, or hey, this is good information, or this is what's going on, or that also helps you be perceived as an expert. And it obviously is related to building trust.
Absolutely. And the other side of it as well, because it's expertise and a good judgment, and that's sort of, we've been talking about that perception. Something I came across that they were saying, if you want to improve your reliability and also the way that you are perceived as reliable, explain your thought process. And I think that makes a big difference for like, if you explain to people, this was my thought process through this judgment, through this decision, you've done a couple of things. You've included them. You've shown that you care about what they think. So you're including them, and that's part of the relational thing. But you're also showing it's not just a black box, a magic black box. So I wonder why. We never know what that person's going to do. And I mean, that's something that we talk about quite a lot when, on our football team, when we, everybody always likes to have a pop at the referee after the game. But there are genuinely some referees that you go, nobody on the pitch knows what's going to happen any given time. So like either team, something might happen and everybody might have their opinion, but everybody there's a couple of rests where you go, we don't know what's going on. It's almost like someone has a random number generator in their brain that just pushes it, and then a random output comes off.
Yeah,
And so it's like that doesn't lead to great refereeing and great outcomes in that situation. So if
and
you're
that's because
explaining
we don't trust what's going on. We don't see the
precisely,
expertise, we
yeah,
don't see the consistency,
yeah,
and we actually don't have a good relationship.
exactly. And actually, it does affect the game in a negative way for everyone involved, not just one team, but
Yeah,
everyone. So it's like, oh yeah. So if I'm explaining that, I'm including others, and I'm actually helping them to see this is where my judgment's coming from. And perhaps it also goes, they might come back and go, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that, and then it gives you an opportunity to say, oh yeah, maybe I'm wrong in that assumption or that logic or whatever.
mm.
Again, that is increasing people's idea of your trustworthiness because you're able to be, challenged in a positive way. So
Yeah. Definitely. So one element of being trustworthy or building trust is expertise. And yeah, we talked about that. The second one is being consistent. And I like the idea. He basically went honesty and empathy. You have to be honest with people about commitments you make, but you also have to empathize if you have to reject somebody or say no to something in order to keep other commitments. Understand that you are saying no and empathize with that difficulty. I thought that was really interesting.
yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I came across as well. When it comes to this, honesty is a huge aspect there, and just going, this is, and also sometimes it's a case of in a difficult situation. So you might be behind on something that you've committed to. Actually, the best way that you can get back in front of that is to be honest and to
Mm.
go right through the front door and say, hey, just so and not maybe pile up excuses, but to go, this is now where we're at.
Mm.
We're being honest about this. I'm not going to try and hide, not going to try and share. Obviously we'll try and maybe make up some of that time, but I'm behind on my project or whatever. And you are then being honest and showing, okay, that means that your manager or the client or whoever knows you're not trying to trick them. You're not trying to keep them in the shade if something's going wrong. They know that because stuff does go wrong and sometimes it is out of your control and it's not necessarily your fault. But
Yeah,
you are then going, I'm trustworthy to bring that bad news and then you can deal with it.
yeah,
Because it's so many times you think projects maybe go far down the line and something isn't right, but nobody piped up. Or
yeah.
that we've spoken about it before on the podcast. There was an infamous sailing when we were on the Logos Hope, where we ended up going for 5-day sail and we had to ration water. And the reason we had to ration water was because before the sailing, we had taken on lots of fuel, bunkered fuel, because you don't always get to do that every port. With the thinking that we would be able to generate clean water with the what they call reverse osmosis machines during the sailing. But the person that cleaned them had accidentally done it wrong and had broken them, but didn't tell anybody and didn't own up to it until the sail was underway because they just hoped it would be okay. And so then that landed us in this massive problem. Whereas if they'd opened up earlier and said, actually, I think I might have made a mistake, they could have tested it earlier, they could have made some adjustments, taken on some more water, and the sail would have been better for everyone. But their bad decision, they made a mistake, an honest mistake, but then their decision to keep it hidden
Mm.
affected the lives of 400 people for the following week.
Yeah. And that was why it's interesting, because it's about delivering on commitments, track. And he said basically, when you make a commitment, write it down, track it. Like keep a record of the commitments you make, because it's so important that you make commitments. And the perception of it, like, yeah, 1 out of 10 that you don't make, it might not feel big to you, but it feels big to your manager, it feels big to the people that work for you, it feels big to a client. Uh, and then and then managing that, like you said, so often the conversation which maybe your manager has with you goes, so how's it going on the project? Oh yeah, it's fine. And then 2 weeks later, the deadline's come. You're like, oh, sorry, like I haven't been able to do it. Now your manager's surprised, the client's surprised, you've let them down, and you might have all the reasons in the world, but that surprise and that shock and that not meeting that commitment is huge. And so
Yes.
that's why it ties into basically keep people informed, be open, be confident. You have to be honest with people. And he talks about how he worked with a a client, Joseph Folkman, worked with somebody who was really good at that. Said, "Oh, you want me to do this commitment? Well, here's my other commitments that I've prioritized. Which one do I stop doing in order to hit yours?" And Stephen Covey talks about that as well. And it's actually, if we're on top of it and we're organized and we know where, and we've kept a track of our commitments, that really allows us to communicate that to other people. So yeah,
I
I
like
think,
that.
yeah.
And I
Well,
think something I'd say just on an aspect of tracking, someone might go, "Well, how do I track my commitments?" It might, do you need like an app or a complex system? I quite like the principle that you've spoken to me about before, which is this idea of if if you can't do it with a pencil and paper or a pen and paper, then your system, whatever it is too complex.
mm,
So start with a pen and paper, and you might have for each project, if you've got projects, if that's how your thing works, or you might have just a week. These are the commitments I've got for this week, and just track, but keep it as simple as possible, and just go, here's the thing, maybe some small steps for like break that down, and then and here's when I'm going to get it done by,
mm.
and keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So the first element is expertise. The second element of building trust is consistency. The third element is building relationships. Matt, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, one of the things that was really interesting that struck out to me when I was looking into this, they were saying about actually one of the best ways to develop trustworthiness or to grow people's trust for you is to extend trust to others. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And this phrase came out, trust begets trust. And so if you have a boss that is withholding information from you and constantly micromanaging, what they're basically broadcasting is, I don't trust my team. And therefore, you don't trust them. Because again, kind of goes back to that thing we spoke about last week. That it almost becomes a hidden figure sort of thing of like, they're withholding information. Why are they withholding information? Or they don't trust me to be able to do my job. Why don't they trust me to be able to do my job? And so it creates a one-sided lack, which then just it perforates everything, and you're no longer going to have trust coming back the other way. So, and that's where, going back to what we said earlier, when you're explaining your judgment to other people, you're effectively going, I'm extending trust to you to be able to handle that information, to handle my reasoning, and to handle that with care, and also with honesty, and then could come back and go, I I think this, I think that, whatever. And so by extending trust to others and saying, hey, this is what I expect of you. I believe you can get it done. Let me know if there's any trouble or whatever. You're extending that trust and you're saying, I've now given this to you. They're more likely to be really appreciative. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, going back to those stats you said earlier in the episode, more productivity, happier life outcomes, more compensation, less burnout, probably less staff turnover. Because generally, when someone trusts you with something, but also there's that trust to be able to go, actually, I'm struggling with this. Can I have some help? And it's not then well, you're in trouble because you're struggling, but oh, well, great, thanks for letting us know, because ultimately our objective is the same. We want this to succeed. We're on the same team. So if you're struggling and you open up and then I help you with that, wonderful. It's a win-win-win. So if you extend that trust to others, and again, the including others, if I'm isolating myself, nobody knows me, and nobody knows what's going on in here and in here. And so if I'm including others into some of those decision making, and you said that story about the guy who came in to do the change, the second one who was successful, he made sure every time he went into an important meeting or even just any meeting, he brought one of the team along, partly to go, you're effectively my subject matter expert, but also partly to be like, you're included in this conversation. And I think that probably went far and above beyond many of the other actions in helping people to grow trust in him, because it's not this, okay, he's gone off to the big table now to talk to the big guys and we don't know what's going on. It's like, oh, I'm invited. Great. Awesome. Yeah. I get to see behind the curtain, So I think extending trust and then including others is a big aspect.
Oh, it's a huge aspect. And then there's so many simpler aspects that he kicks off the chapter with, which is basically time invested. Seems really obvious, like actually be interested in people. How you greet them makes a really big difference. Are you going over and sharing information not just about work, but about life? And are you involved in the water cooler conversations and the social interactions outside that? Not to
Yeah.
look down on that, but to recognize that's really important for building trust and building relationship and building connection. And yeah, I just feel those elements, they're really obvious. If I want people to trust me with work, actually we need that. It helps that I've connected and I've asked you about your family or that project or the thing that was going on at home that you told me about, and I've kept the track of that, and I've showed that I'm interested in that, and I care about you, and now you're more likely to trust me. You've got my back because you know I care about those things. And then he just said there are these other elements of it which are really important, and he said especially if you're a leader of a team, if you are developing and coaching other people, he said we've all had that mentor in our lives that we just trusted because they took an interest in us, and they wanted to share their learning with us, but also they were open to learning from us. They
Yeah.
weren't sort of know-it-all looking down and like bum, 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 but actually they were open to that. So that really builds trust. And then he also talked about that idea of competing, sorry, cooperating and not competing. Are you, building trust? Am I working with you or am I competing against you? And that's a huge thing. Like, you don't ultimately really trust the person you're competing against because you think it's more important that they win than that we win. And so, that's going to undermine trust. And then the last one, I think I really wanted to come back in on this one again, asking for feedback.
Mm.
And he said young leaders and younger people often do this really well. They're asking for feedback, but through people's career, that happens less and less. They
Wow.
said if they retained that and they kept asking for feedback, and the ones that do, and there are some that do, they retain a high trust scores. There's a humility to continue to ask for it. So when we're new in the door, we're like, oh yeah, I can ask. I'm not expected to know it all. But actually, sometimes we do feel the pressure, especially in a leadership position, to have all of the answers. Oh, you're the expert now. You should know all the answers. So stop asking questions. Don't ask for feedback. That's not the right thing because you've got to be seen as the expert. He said, ultimately, the ones that ask for feedback are the ones that are trusted. And that really strongly relates. Yeah, so that was interesting.
I think there's several factors that play with that as well. It's that ancient proverb, the person that asks seems a fool for 5 minutes, but the person that never asks is a fool for the rest of their life.
Mm.
So, like in asking for feedback, you literally get the information you're asking for, and you can then take that on board. And I mean, obviously, it's your responsibility to handle that well, and hopefully, you've asked someone that's safe, that's not just going to blast you. But so yeah, you are literally getting better, but also it shows to the people or the person that you've asked, here's a bit of self-awareness. This person is A, wanting to improve, and B, aware that they don't have everything right. And so it already disarms the thing, because when we see someone who we think is maybe showing a bit of a know-it-all attitude, even if we think, oh, they're the boss and they should, I think there's something intrinsic in us that almost goes, oh, no, show them that they're not a know-it-all, and almost knock them down a bit. Whereas as soon as someone goes, actually, I get things wrong, I make mistakes, and I would like to improve. Could you help me see my blind spots? Already, you're now brought alongside rather than in opposition,
Mm.
and you're now walking together. It's like, that's a trust position.
Yeah. And he said basically, know it alls, great people. If they're on the same level as you, they grate you more than anything. So yeah,
Wow.
don't be a sort of a know-it-all. Be humble, actually. And
Yeah.
so I suppose I would bring this conversation into land and just say we forgot to answer a really important question at the beginning, but can trust actually be improved? Because many times we believe once that trust is broken, or if you're not trusted, that's game over. There's people that believe that. And his research shows though that the people in the bottom 10-20% of trust, when they put in 18 to 24 months of work, they got to middle of the pack. Right. So which is a big improvement actually to go to sort of 50% ish. But that's still 18 to 24 months of intentional
Wow.
work. That's like 2 years, and that's significant. And so building trust, it's not a, like you said, it's not I do these magic behaviors and I'm an expert and I'm consistent with all my commitments and everyone likes me and I've got really good relationships. So it is actionable. There is demonstrated evidence that we can build it and improve it, but it requires work and work over time, and that's the consistency part. It requires expertise. Well, that requires time. It requires you to have good relationships. Well, nobody you have a good relationship with did it happen just instantaneously, really. Even if you clicked with that person straight away, your relationship is better after time invested. And so I thought it'd be really good to sort of land there and just go, yeah, trust can be improved. Here's some steps we talked about today, but it still requires time and effort.
Absolutely. And to anyone that's thinking, oh, what about the whole thing of like, if you lose that trust, you can lose it in an instant, and but it takes like a long, long time to build. Yes, yeah, you can lose it very quickly. But I would say if you are putting the effort in, and for example, if you go, let's do a bit of a review. Maybe I'm not as trusted as and there's not as much trust in my life. So I'm going to start putting that work in now. In a year, in 2 years' time, because of the work you've put in, the sort of behaviors and the mindsets that you are putting in yourself are probably making it so much less likely that you're going to walk down a path where suddenly you fall off a cliff of trust, because it's not the final decision that was the thing, or like the one mistake that meant you lost the trust. It was all the 1,000 ones that led you up to a point, and then it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's just to jump in on that, is that it's the moments that come to my mind of when trust is suddenly lost is a secret that suddenly comes to light.
Yes.
Or withheld information, where it's like, even if you just keep people informed, if you're open, if you're honest with people, you're not going to fall off the cliff unless you're just open with people and you consistently don't make your commitments. But if you're if you're trying to be trustworthy, if you're being honest with yourself, with other people, if you're keeping people informed, if you're living in a way that's trying to be trustworthy, I don't think you're going to have that cliff edge experience, as you're saying.
Absolutely. And I mean, a simple way of putting that is the whole thing of like, keep short accounts with people, keep short accounts with the tax man, because then you're not in for a shock. And I think that bad surprise, that bad shock is what leads to those sudden erosion of trust. And then you're at bottom. Whereas if you are going, I'm steadily keeping that open book, then it doesn't have the chance to build into something. And there's no surprise. People are like, well, yeah, we it still might be a bad situation, but it's like, well, we know about this, and so we're working on it. So
and even he has a chapter on rebuilding trust after lost trust. Even if you are in the bottom, you've done that. It's still not too late. It just requires time and effort, and it might require more time and effort. So yeah, that's this week's episode: how to build trust, not just why it's important, not just the trifecta of trust, but how to build trust. Let us know what you're thinking about that. I find it a very interesting topic. I think it's really important. I think you can probably hear some of the passion that comes through as I talk about it. But yeah, I'm always interested to hear what you guys are thinking about when you're hearing these things.
Yeah, we trust that you enjoyed that episode.